And welcome back to Spiritual Strength. I'm Gene Zanetti, your coast-to-coast spiritual coach from Spiritual Strength. And today we're talking about the return to Babble-on. And Babble-on being spelled like the word Babble-on. We're in the octave of the Pentecost right now. And of course, a lot of information circulating about the gift of tongues. What is it? How do we understand this as Catholics? So a lot of misconceptions out there. Let's start with St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas says that the gift of tongues is what's called a gratuitous gift. In other words, it's unmerited. It's something that cannot be prayed for. So as an example, a religious vocation or a vocation to be a priest, you can't pray for the gift of being a priest. It's a gratuitous gift that's given freely by God. So we have to understand, as such, we cannot pray for the gift of tongues. Unfortunately, the charismatic movement nowadays, they pray for the gift of tongues, which shows a lack of understanding of solid Thomistic theology of tongues as a gratuitous gift that cannot be prayed for. Also, if you look at the reading for the Sunday of Pentecost, Dom Prosper Gueranger, who is the man of tradition before Vatican II, he has a great 4-volume series on living the liturgical calendar. And Charles Coulomb speaks about this, that it will radically change your spiritual life and your approach to the faith if you do this every day. If you read Dom Prosper Gueranger's liturgical year, we could throw a link in the show notes of the video. But he speaks about that when and again, he is the voice for tradition before Vatican II, that a lot of people say. When you look at it, when you look at St. Peter speaking in tongues on the feast of the first Pentecost, Peter was speaking his language and they understood it in their language. Peter wasn't saying, I should have bought a Honda. He wasn't going on like a lot of times the modern charismatic movement does now. And I'm not putting anyone down, because I was actually in the charismatic movement for about 3 years until I learned better. And then I simply left. Why? Because truth trumps everything. Okay. All I want to do is I want to serve God on his terms, not on my own. If I came to the understanding by solid Catholic teachings and tradition that the charismatic movement was correct, I would simply join. But if I see that it's counter to the faith, I simply leave. And I'm not putting anyone down. Some of the most virtuous people, some of the people who take spiritual warfare the most serious, and some of the people who are most earnestly and strongly desiring to live a godly life are from the charismatic movement. That doesn't say anything about their theology. For their theology, we want to look at Catholic tradition. So, and it's only one topic of theology, by the way. There's many different branches of theology. So we're speaking specifically about gratuitous gifts, and most specifically about the gift of tongues. Peter was not babbling, B-A-B-B-L-E. And in fact, the first Pentecost was a complete reversal of the Tower of Babel. If you remember in the book of Genesis, the people tried to build the Tower of Babel to reach to the sky. It was an act of pride. So what God did is he confounded the people. He spread them out across the world, and they were now babbling different languages. Different languages is a punishment. It's actually a punishment. I remember speaking with some friends in college, like, wouldn't it be great if everyone in the world spoke the same language, or if everyone adopted sign language? That's, the mindset of globalism in a positive way. Well, the church accounted for that. Christ accounted for that. That's why Latin is the language of the church. And that's why it's so important we use Latin, not only exclusively in Mass, but also that we as Catholics get back to our roots and start learning and understanding Latin, because all of the official church documents are in Latin. It's the language of the church. It's sacred because it's one of the 3 languages that was nailed to the cross of our redemption, along with Hebrew and Greek. Right? It says Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews, in Latin, on the cross, which redeemed us, Christ redeeming us on the cross. It's unchangeable. And why is it unchangeable? Because it's a dead language. It's a dead language. And a lot of people don't realize this, but when Jesus attended temple service, the synagogue, the temple service in the synagogues, it was in Hebrew, and Hebrew was a dead language at the time. Jesus spoke Aramaic. The people came from around the world. They spoke different languages on the big feasts of Pentecost, the Feast of the Trumpets, and the Feast of Tabernacles. they spoke different languages, those Jews from around the world. And then when they came to the temple, everyone spoke Hebrew. In fact, a lot of theologians agree that when Christ did his teaching to his apostles, he did it in Hebrew. So there's nothing wrong with having a dead language. And what's a good thing about dead language is that it can't be changed. Right now we hear about Pope Francis possibly changing the words of the Our Father to instead of lead us not into temptation, because nowadays it sounds different. You might look at some old Catholic textbooks and it says Catholics worship Mary, not in the sense that they mean it today. Worship now, because there's different forms of worship, right? The highest form of worship is sacrifice, adoration. And that's the holy sacrifice of Mass is offered to God alone, not to Mary. But in a sense, you can say Catholics worship Mary because it used to mean a form of honoring Mary. Here's my point. When you use the Latin language, which is a dead language, there's no confusion. For God, it's latria. That's what worship is. For Mary, it's hyperdulia, which is obviously infinitely below God, but infinitely above everyone else. Then St. Joseph is protodulia, which is infinitely below Mary, but infinitely above us. And then there's the saints, who is dulia. And the dulia is, the honor due to the saints. So Latin was a way of unifying people together. So Latin is a unifier, reversing the Tower of Babel. Okay, so language is very important. Language is extremely important, and so important to understand that now the gift of tongues. And also, again, as we said, the tradition was always in Latin. So we have to understand this is a complete reversal of the Tower of Babel. Peter didn't say, I should have bought a Honda. Peter spoke his language and they heard the other language. That's what tongues meant. And that's what it meant throughout the entire church. And again, I always invite people, don't take my word for it. Read St. Thomas Aquinas, read Dom Prosper Gueranger. All of us should be docile to the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit speaks to us through the church, through tradition. So a lot of times now there's a lot of misunderstandings because since the Second Vatican Council, there's been a big influence on the church from the outside, especially the Protestant and the Pentecostal, the evangelical, those different groups. And we have to understand we're Catholic. And Catholic means we acknowledge that it's not about our own internal sentiments. It's not about our own internal feelings or our experiences. It's not about that. The Catholic Church is all about dying to ourselves and conforming to something external to us. The teachings of the church are completely external to us. So it's not saying God's putting down your feelings, but your personal conscience doesn't mean very much. Me too. My personal conscience doesn't mean very much. We need to have a formed conscience, and that how our conscience is formed needs to be completely with Catholic tradition. So it helps to read Catholic books before 1960, before the main infiltration was sweeping. There were always problems. There were always church leaders and different people making mistakes, being erroneous, or teaching heresy throughout the church history. That's always happened. But what we've seen since the Second Vatican Council is completely unprecedented. We've never seen this before. Now, unfortunately, the catechesis is weakened so much. And I mean, pretty much any priest will agree with this. And people, we see it. The catechesis is tremendously weakened. So we have to understand tongues. And I've heard a priest speak about him speaking about his experience with tongues. He brought in a priest from somewhere in Africa to observe a prayer group. They went to a priest and another priest from Africa, they observed a charismatic prayer group just to see what it was all about. And they went there not knowing what to expect. And the charismatic group was off praying in tongues. And guess what? That African priest said, stop. He wasn't planning on speaking at all. He said, stop everything, stop. And well, what's going on? The people were blaspheming God in his language that none of them knew. So that's the thing. When we don't know what we're saying, that could be a form of channeling, as Father Ripperger says. And I strongly recommend everyone watch the video by Father Chad Ripperger on speaking in tongues. I'll put the link in the show notes. Watch that video. It's a form of channeling because you don't know what you're saying. Also, with the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, remember, everything needs to be, all of our faculties are ordered to a certain end, right? That's very important. The final cause in philosophy, there's the efficient cause, the material cause, the formal cause, and the final cause. And nowadays, science is only concerned with the material and the efficient cause. But the scholastics were very concerned with the formal cause and the final cause. Bottom line is this: our final cause is what is something ordered towards. The faculty of speech is ordered towards communicating truth to someone else. That's the purpose of the faculty of speech, communicating truth to someone else. So if you're going blah, 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 and think you're praying in tongues, people aren't understanding you. You might say you're praising, but you don't know what you're saying, and you don't know if you're falling victim to that channeling, where now a demon is blaspheming God through your voice. So the point is, in that old gift, the gift of tongues, as was understood in the Acts of the Apostles, and the gift of tongues as used in the Bible biblically, they were saying something, and the people listening actually understood it in that language, in their own language. So it's important to know that speech needs to be reasonable, even when we're speaking to God, even praising to God. Now, I understand praying and praising God. Praying is more of a movement of our heart towards God. So I get that part, but it doesn't mean it's ever unreasonable, right? It never contradicts what we do towards God, never contradicts what the faculty of speech. So again, take it from Father Ripperger, take it from the priest that went in and noticed the channeling firsthand, take it from the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, and take it from the great writings of Dom Prosper Gueranger. So right now we see there's been this return to Babel, the gift, the quote, the so-called gift of tongues, as is used by Pentecostals and a number of Catholics in the charismatic movement, is not a truly Catholic understanding. So we need to understand that the gift of language is ordered towards speech, is ordered towards communicating truth. And if we don't know what we're saying, we're not using our faculty in accord with reason. And St. Thomas Aquinas would say it. And again, it's not about my feelings. It's not about my emotions. If someone could show me something contrary to this, send it to me, please. I'll change my opinion if it makes more sense. I don't know how at this point, though, with the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, Tom Gueranger, Father Ripperger, it seems to be an open shut case. But we just need to remember, as Catholics, we're not Protestants, of course. So our job is to conform our intellect and our will entirely to the traditional church teachings. So even if there's more recent popes that have taught error, our job is to believe the Catholic tradition. So the popes are not going to be contradicting St. Thomas Aquinas and Dom Gueranger. This is all solid tradition that's taken from the Bible, the church fathers, the scholastics, the popes throughout history. A new pope can't say something contrary to that. A pope might expand on something, but a pope saying something would never result in it being the conclusion being completely contrary to the premise. That wouldn't make any sense. But so, like I said, it's just let's drop our ego. This was a tough pill for me to swallow too, because again, I know a lot of good people who are still in the charismatic movement. And as far as holiness of life, I can't compete with them. So it's not a me against them thing. We just want to be docile to the Holy Spirit and worship God on his terms, not on ours. The job of a Catholic is to surrender our intellect to the tradition of the church. That's it. It's not about your feelings. It's not about my feelings. It's not about your experience. It's not about my experience. It's not about your consciousness or a conscience or my conscience. It's about submission to the tradition and doing the very best we can. I hope this video helps. I hope it didn't come across as too strong or anything, but it's important to know, and sometimes the truth hurts. God bless you. God bless your families. Ave Maria.